a fairly common, well, not really common, but question that I receive a decent amount of is usually framed in this way. And it's, what would you say to those who disagree with you? And it can be uh, targeted towards a different group. Usually it's widened out to people of any faith, like because I'm a Protestant Christian, it's what about the Muslims, the Hindus, the Hare Krishnas, Pastafarians. Like, what would you say to that person who has a different religious claim than yours? But often also it includes those who are like Christian adjacent cults, like the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, or what would you say to those who are Christian but a different denomination, like let's say Methodist or whatever, like what would you say to them? And before I get into my response to that question, I'm going to talk about a little bit of my credentials with which to respond to this question. And one is that I wrote a 15,000 word um, market research report when I was in college on the kind of customer concerns or the customer challenges, relations challenges presented by the five largest primary like religious affiliations. And basically what it boils down to is don't serve pork or shellfish to Muslims or Jews. Don't attempt to serve beef to a Hindu. A lot of Buddhists are vegetarian or vegan, but you want to ask first to be sure um, that uh, Muslims can't have fermented alcohol, but there are some that are willing to accept distilled, like things like that. That as well as different things that different faiths consider insulting or like actions, words, things like that, different stuff like that. 15,000 words on. What's interesting is that Protestants basically don't care about anything, especially American Protestants. You almost cannot offend them. And then Catholics don't try to offer them anything on Lent. That's basically it. 15,000 words to explain that. And anyway, of course, there was more to it than just that. There was more other issues like annual feasts and things like that. But yeah, so that's one. Number two is that I spent some time working with an organization called City Impact, in which we studied how to um, evangelize to people of South Asian and Southeast Asian heritage in the Bay Area. And so Hinduism, Confucianism, Buddhists, Shinto from Japan, people like not only just answering the questions that they might have, but also studying their beliefs to understand what their mindset is. And by far the most difficult was the white liberal syncretist, because of the fact that they really don't believe in anything. They just have this kind of faddish obsession with other cultures. So, anyway, so there's that. And then additionally, I have been blacklisted by Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses at multiple points in my life. That they just simply, that they like I'd be outside doing yard work, and they would come along and they would not come along after that. And it's not because I'm rude. It's actually that simply I know, like I have a Book of Mormon. I know what they teach, and so I ask questions they don't want to answer, because of the fact that by answering those questions they would talk themselves out of their own faith. So, that aside, my simple answer to all those people, all those groups, is you're wrong. Now, sometimes that's a significant and that's sometimes an insignificant matter. So the things that separate me from being a United Methodist, me from being a Southern Baptist, me from being a, I don't know, like a Lutheran. Sometimes those things don't matter. Like Lutherans baptize infants. Not a fan of that, but they're not going to hell because they do. But there are some things that are important. Like, for instance, um, the divinity of Christ. Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe the same thing that Christians believe about the divinity and the humanity of Christ. Um, and that is kind of the thing, as well as the inerrancy and the supremacy and the sufficiency of the written word of God. If you don't believe in that, then you're not a Christian, and you're wrong. And that's well, aren't you being intolerant? Aren't you being discriminatory? And quite frankly, I you can take your liberal, progressive, political nonsense and just kind of entertain that elsewhere, because you specifically asked what my opinion is, and I gave it to you. So you cannot like what my opinion is, but you cannot try to assert these silly, arbitrarily enforced social conventions that only this modern era cares about on them. Because this is a truth matter, it's not a feelings matter, it's not an emotional issue. So, yeah, they're wrong. And they can either change their minds and submit to Christ, or they will have a very poor and unfortunate end.